Veltar stood in the briefing room looking at the new soldiers who had just joined their unit. These were humans, the newest species to join the Galactic Defense Coalition. He had heard stories about them but had never seen one up close before today. They looked so small and weak. Their skin was pale and soft-looking. They had no natural claws or thick armor plates like his people, the Kethmoran, did. No sharp teeth or poison glands. Nothing that made them look dangerous at all. Veltar wondered how these creatures had even survived long enough to develop space travel. The human soldiers sat quietly in the back rows of the briefing room. There were 4 of them assigned to his battalion. 3 males and 1 female. They wore simple combat uniforms that looked basic compared to the advanced armor systems the other coalition species used. Commander Zethnal began the mission briefing. His voice echoed through the metal room as he spoke about their target. A mining facility on the outer rim had been taken over by Vex raiders. The Vex were insectoid creatures that stood 3 meters tall with razor-sharp claws and acid that could eat through most metals in seconds. Veltar had fought the Vex before. They were vicious killers that showed no mercy to anyone they captured. Their exoskeletons could deflect most energy weapons, and they moved faster than most species could react. Taking back a facility from them would not be easy. The commander pointed to a holographic display showing the mining station. It had 7 levels going deep underground. Intelligence reports suggested at least 50 Vex were inside. Maybe more. Each team will be assigned mixed species partnerships, Commander Zethnal announced. This will help our new human allies learn our combat methods. Veltar felt his stomach drop when he heard his name called to partner with one of the humans. The male who stood up was shorter than Veltar by at least a full meter. He had dark hair and dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around him without showing any emotion. "I am Taimin," the human said when they met after the briefing. His voice was calm and steady. "I look forward to working with you." Veltar tried to hide his disappointment. This small creature would probably get them both killed. "I am Veltar. We should discuss tactics." But Taimin was already walking toward the equipment bay. "Show me what weapons you have available," he said. In the armory, Veltar showed Taimin the standard coalition energy rifles. These weapons could punch through most armor and had enough power to drop a Vex with a direct hit. Taimin picked up one of the rifles and examined it carefully. He checked the power cells and tested the sight alignment. "This will work," Taimin said. But then he walked over to a different section of the armory. He picked up what looked like an ancient chemical projectile weapon. The kind that used explosive powder to fire metal bullets. "Why would you want that old thing?" Veltar asked. "The energy weapons are much more powerful." Taimin smiled slightly. "Sometimes old ways work better." He also selected several small metal knives and attached them to his belt. Veltar thought this was strange but did not comment. During the transport flight to the mining facility, Veltar watched Taimin prepare his equipment. The human cleaned his weapons with careful attention to every detail. He checked and rechecked his ammunition. He sharpened the metal knives until they could cut paper. The other humans did similar preparations. The female soldier named Yujin worked on some kind of explosive devices. The 2 other males, Dongwu and Minseo, studied maps of the facility layout and spoke quietly to each other in their native language. Veltar noticed something odd about how the humans behaved. During the briefing and equipment selection, they had seemed almost casual. But now, as they got closer to combat, their behavior was changing. They became more focused, more alert, like predators preparing for a hunt. When their transport ship reached the mining facility, Veltar could see the damage the Vex had done. Several of the surface buildings were destroyed. Bodies of the mining workers were scattered around the landing pad. The Vex had killed everyone and left the corpses as a warning. First time seeing Vex work, Veltar told Taimin as they prepared to exit the transport. Taimin looked at the dead bodies without any change in expression. "Not much different from other battlefields," he said. Veltar was surprised by this response. How many battlefields had these humans seen? They were supposed to be new to galactic warfare. The team moved toward the main entrance of the facility. Commander Zethnal used a scanner to check for Vex movement inside. The readings showed multiple contacts on the first level. At least a dozen creatures were waiting just inside the entrance. "Standard breach protocol," the commander announced. "Energy weapons only. Watch for acid attacks. Stay in formation." But as they prepared to enter, Taimin did something unexpected. He set down his energy rifle and picked up the old projectile weapon instead. The other humans also chose their primitive weapons over the advanced coalition gear. "What are you doing?" Veltar asked. "These work better in close quarters," Taemin replied. "Less chance of overpenetration. More stopping power." Veltar did not understand what he meant, but there was no time to ask more questions. The entrance doors were opening and the first Vex appeared. The creature was massive. 3 meters of chitinous armor and razor-sharp claws. Its mandibles opened wide, showing rows of teeth designed for tearing flesh. Acid dripped from its mouth, leaving smoking holes in the metal floor. Veltar raised his energy rifle and took aim. But before he could fire, Taemin was already moving. The human stepped forward instead of taking cover. His primitive weapon made a sharp cracking sound and the Vex stumbled. Another crack and green blood sprayed from the creature's head. It collapsed with a thunderous crash. Veltar stared in shock. The energy weapons needed multiple hits to drop a Vex, but Taemin had killed it with just 2 shots from his primitive gun. More Vex poured through the entrance. The other coalition soldiers fell back to defensive positions and began firing their energy weapons, but the humans moved forward. They advanced toward the enemy instead of seeking cover. Yujin threw one of her explosive devices into a group of 3 Vex. The blast vaporized all of them instantly. Dongwu and Minxiu flanked around the sides, using their projectile weapons to target Vex that tried to escape. Within minutes, the entrance area was clear. 12 Vex lay dead. The humans had killed most of them. Veltar looked at his partner with new eyes. This small, quiet creature had just displayed combat skills that matched or exceeded veteran Kethmoran warriors. And he had done it with primitive weapons and simple tactics. "How did you learn to fight like that?" Veltar asked. Taemin was already reloading his weapon and checking his equipment for damage. "Same way everyone learns," he said simply. "Practice." But Veltar knew there was more to it than that. These humans were not the weak newcomers everyone thought they were. They were something else entirely. Something that had been hiding behind their small size and soft appearance. As the team prepared to move deeper into the facility, Veltar realized this mission was going to be very different from what he had expected. Fighting next to humans was going to teach him things about warfare he had never imagined, and he was not sure he was ready for those lessons. The team moved deeper into the mining facility after clearing the entrance. Veltar stayed close to Taemin as they advanced down the main corridor. The walls were covered in scratch marks from Vex claws. Green acid stains ate through the metal in several places. The air smelled of death and chemicals. Commander Zethnal held up his hand to signal a stop. His scanner was picking up movement ahead. The corridor split into 3 directions. Each path led to different sections of the first level. Intelligence reports said the Vex liked to set up ambush points at intersections like this. "We split into 3 teams," the commander announced quietly. "Clear each section and meet at the elevator shaft to the 2nd level." Veltar found himself assigned to the left corridor with Taemin and 2 other coalition soldiers. One was a Draxi warrior named Kethmor, who had thick armored skin and could breathe toxic gas. The other was a Quellan female called Rixta, who had 4 arms and could see in complete darkness. As they moved down their assigned corridor, Veltar noticed how differently Taemin moved, compared to the briefing room. Gone was the casual, relaxed human from before. Now Taemin moved like a hunter. His steps were silent, his head turned constantly to scan for threats. His weapon was held in a ready position. The corridor ended at a large storage area filled with mining equipment. Massive drilling machines sat silent in the darkness. Conveyor belts snaked through the room carrying ore to processing stations, perfect hiding places for Vex ambushes. Rixta used her night vision to scan the room. "I see movement behind the 3rd drilling machine," she whispered. "At least 4 contacts." Kethmor suggested they use his toxic gas to flush the Vex out into the open. It was a standard coalition tactic. Fill the area with poison gas and force the enemy to retreat into prepared kill zones, but Taemin shook his head. "Gas will alert every Vex in the facility to our position. We need stealth." "How do you suggest we handle 4 Vex in close quarters?" Veltar asked. The storage area was cramped with machinery. No room for proper formations or coordinated fire. Taemin studied the room layout for several seconds. Then he did something that made Veltar's blood run cold. He set down his projectile weapon and drew one of his metal knives. "I go in first. Draw their attention." When they focus on me, you hit them from behind. That is suicide, Kethmore protested. 4 Vex will tear you apart in seconds. Not if I move fast enough, Taemin replied. He was checking the edge of his knife blade, testing its sharpness against his thumb. Veltar watched a thin line of red blood appear on the human skin. The blade was incredibly sharp, but what good was a knife against creatures with armor plating and acid weapons? There has to be another way, Veltar said, but Taemin was already moving. He slipped into the storage area like a shadow. Veltar lost sight of him almost immediately among the machinery. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the sound started. First came a chittering shriek from one of the Vex, then the sound of claws scraping against metal. A wet slicing noise, another shriek that cut off suddenly. More sounds of struggle and movement. Kethmore raised his energy rifle to provide support, but there was nothing to shoot at. The battle was happening somewhere in the maze of equipment, and they could not see any targets. The noises continued for almost a full minute. Veltar heard impacts against machinery, the hiss of acid eating through metal, a human grunt of pain or effort, then sudden silence. Taemin, Veltar called out quietly. Clear, came the response from somewhere in the darkness. When they moved into the storage area, they found 4 dead Vex scattered among the mining equipment. Each one had been killed with precise cuts to vital points, joints where the armor was weakest, gaps between exoskeleton plates, the throats where acid glands could be severed. Taemin emerged from behind a conveyor belt. His uniform was torn in several places and green blood covered his arms and chest, but he appeared uninjured. How is this possible? Rixta demanded. 4 Vex in close combat. You should be dead. Taemin was cleaning his knife blade on a piece of cloth. They are big and strong, but they are also slow and predictable. Use their size against them. Veltar examined one of the dead Vex more closely. The cuts were surgical in their precision. Each strike had found exactly the right spot to cause maximum damage. This was not lucky fighting. This was the work of someone who understood Vex anatomy better than most Coalition scientists. Where did you learn about Vex weak points? Veltar asked. We study our enemies before we fight them, Taemin replied simply. But that answer raised more questions than it answered. How long had humans been studying the Vex? These creatures only appeared in this sector of space within the last few years. How could a newly contacted species already have detailed knowledge of their biology? The team regrouped with the other units at the elevator shaft. All 3 corridors had been cleared with minimal casualties. But Veltar noticed the other Coalition soldiers looking at the humans with new expressions. Word was spreading about their combat performance. Yujin had single-handedly eliminated 6 Vex using improvised explosive devices made from mining chemicals. Dongwu had killed 3 Vex that tried to escape through ventilation shafts. Mincio had set up a perfect ambush that caught 5 Vex in a crossfire. Commander Zethnal reviewed the casualty reports with obvious surprise. 18 Vex eliminated, 0 Coalition fatalities. This is significantly better than projected losses. The elevator to the 2nd level had been damaged by Vex acid. They would have to use maintenance shafts to descend deeper into the facility. The narrow tunnels would force them to move in single file, another perfect setup for Vex ambushes. As they prepared to enter the maintenance shafts, Veltar pulled Taemin aside. Your people have fought the Vex before, he said. It was not a question. Taemin looked at him for a long moment before responding. We have fought many things, but the Vex specifically. You know their anatomy, their tactics, their weaknesses. We learn quickly, Taemin said. That is not an answer. Taemin checked his equipment one more time before answering. My people have a saying. Know your enemy better than you know yourself. We take that seriously. The maintenance shaft was barely wide enough for a single person. They would have to crawl through it for almost 50 meters before reaching the 2nd level. If Vex were waiting at the other end, they would be trapped with no room to maneuver. Commander Zethnal volunteered to take point, but Taemin stepped forward instead. I should go first, the human said. I am smallest. If there is trouble, I can back out faster, the commander agreed reluctantly. Veltar watched Taemin disappear into the narrow tunnel. His projectile weapon was slung across his back. The metal knife was gripped in his teeth. He moved through the shaft like he had done this many times before. Veltar followed behind him, trying to understand what he was seeing. These humans were not new to warfare at all. They were experienced soldiers who had been hiding their true capabilities. But why would they do that? What advantage was there in appearing weak and primitive? As they crawled through the darkness toward the second level, Veltar realized he was not just fighting alongside humans. He was fighting alongside something that had been pretending to be human. Something much more dangerous than anyone in the coalition suspected, and he was starting to wonder if that was a good thing or the most terrifying discovery of his military career. The maintenance shaft ended at a ventilation grate that opened into the second level of the mining facility. Taman had been crawling through the narrow tunnel for 10 minutes when he suddenly stopped moving. Veltar could hear him breathing quietly ahead but could not see what was happening. "What is wrong?" Veltar whispered. "Vex guard post directly below the grate," Taman replied softly. "2 sentries. They have not noticed us yet." Veltar felt his chest tighten with fear. They were trapped in a tunnel barely wide enough for one person. If the Vex discovered them, there would be nowhere to run. The acid weapons would fill the shaft and kill them all. Commander Zethnal's voice came through their communication devices. "Can you bypass the guards?" "Negative," Taman responded. "Direct path only. No alternate routes. The situation was impossible. 2 Vex guards in an open area with clear sightlines. The tunnel exit was at least 3 meters above the floor. Even if they could drop down silently, the guards would spot them immediately." Veltar expected Taman to request backup or suggest they find another route. Instead, the human began moving again, toward the guards. "What are you doing?" Veltar hissed. "Clearing the path," Taman said. Veltar watched in horror as Taman slowly worked at the ventilation grate. The metal screws holding it in place were old and corroded. With careful pressure, he managed to loosen them without making noise. Soon the entire grate was held in place by just one corner. Below them, the 2 Vex guards stood motionless. These creatures could remain perfectly still for hours while watching for threats. Their compound eyes could detect the smallest movement. Their hearing could pick up sounds that most species could not even perceive. Taman drew his knife and held it between his teeth again. Then he positioned himself at the edge of the tunnel opening. Veltar realized what the human was planning and felt sick. "You cannot drop on them from this height," Veltar whispered. "They will hear you coming." "Not if I land right," Taman replied around the knife blade. Before Veltar could stop him, Taman pushed the grate aside and dropped through the opening. He fell 3 meters in complete silence. At the last second, he twisted his body and landed directly on top of the nearest Vex guard. The impact drove the creature to the ground, but did not kill it. The Vex began to shriek in alarm, but Taman's knife found its throat before any sound escaped. Green blood sprayed across the floor as the creature died. The second guard turned toward the commotion. Its mandibles opened wide and acid began forming in its mouth. But Taman was already rolling away from the first corpse. His projectile weapon appeared in his hands as if by magic. 2 sharp cracks echoed through the chamber. The second guard collapsed with holes blown through its head armor. The entire engagement lasted less than 5 seconds. Taman stood up and checked his equipment for damage. Then he looked up at the tunnel opening where Veltar was still staring in shock. "Area secure," Taman called softly. "Send the others down." One by one, the team members dropped through the tunnel opening. Each landing was carefully controlled to minimize noise. The humans landed as silently as Taman had. The other coalition species made more noise but still managed acceptable stealth. Yujin examined the dead Vex guards with professional interest. "Clean kills," she commented. "No wasted movement. Standard sentry elimination," Dongwu added. "Nothing special." Veltar stared at them. "Nothing special." They were discussing the killing of 2 armored alien warriors like it was routine maintenance work. Commander Zethnal activated his scanner to check for more Vex in the area. The second level was larger than the first, with multiple chambers and corridors. The scanner showed at least 20 contacts spread throughout the level. "We need to clear each section systematically," the commander announced. "No splitting up this time. Too many unknowns." But as they moved through the second level, Veltar began to notice something disturbing about the Vex positions. They were not randomly distributed. The creatures had established overlapping fields of fire, backup positions for retreat, coordinated patrol routes. This was not typical Vex behavior. These creatures were known for savage frontal attacks and overwhelming numbers. They did not usually display this level of tactical thinking. "Something is wrong here," Veltar told Taman as they advanced down a main corridor. "How so?" the human asked. "The Vex are too organized, too coordinated. This looks like military planning." Taman nodded slowly. Someone is commanding them. The team entered a large chamber that had been used for ore processing. Massive machines filled the space with conveyor belts and sorting equipment, creating a maze of hiding spots. But what caught everyone's attention was the sound. Clicking noises echoed through the chamber. Not random chittering, but rhythmic patterns, like some kind of communication system. Rixta used her enhanced hearing to track the source. The sounds are coming from multiple locations. At least 6 different sources all responding to each other. They are coordinating, Minseo observed, sharing information about our position. Commander Zethnal looked worried. This changes our tactical situation significantly. If they can communicate, they can set traps. As if to prove his point, the clicking sound suddenly stopped. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of machinery. Then new sounds began. The scrape of claws on metal, movement in the shadows between equipment. They are repositioning, Taemin said, setting up an ambush. The team took defensive positions, but the chamber was too large with too many hiding spots. The Vex could attack from any direction. Energy weapon fire began coming from 3 different locations simultaneously. Green acid bolts burned through the air around them. One blast hit Kethmore in the shoulder and ate through his armor. The Draxi warrior stumbled but kept fighting. Veltar returned fire with his energy rifle but could not get clear shots. The Vex were using the machinery for cover and only exposing themselves long enough to shoot. That was when he saw something that made his understanding of warfare change forever. The 4 humans suddenly moved as one unit, not following orders or responding to commands. They simply moved together like parts of the same organism. Yujin went left while Dongwu went right. Minseo provided covering fire, while Taemin advanced straight toward the nearest Vex position. They were not communicating with words or hand signals. They seemed to know what each other would do before they did it. Their movements were perfectly coordinated without any visible coordination. Veltar watched Taemin sprint directly toward a Vex firing position, while acid bolts burned the air around him. At the exact moment he reached the enemy position, Yujin threw an explosive that landed precisely where the Vex would dodge. The creature died in the blast. On the other side of the chamber, Dongwu and Minseo performed a similar coordinated attack. One flushed the enemy from cover while the other eliminated it with perfect timing. In less than 2 minutes, all 6 Vex in the chamber were dead. The humans regrouped at the center of the room and began checking their equipment as if nothing unusual had happened. "How did you coordinate those attacks?" Commander Zethnal demanded. "I saw no communication between you." "Experience," Yujin replied simply. "Training," added Dongwu. But Veltar knew it was more than that. What he had witnessed was not possible through training alone. These 4 humans had fought together so many times that they could predict each other's actions perfectly. They were a unit that had been forged in combat over years or maybe decades. The question that terrified him was simple. If humans were new to galactic warfare, where had they gained all this experience fighting together? The team reached the entrance to the 3rd level, where they found something that made everyone stop and stare. The elevator shaft had been completely destroyed. Not by explosives or energy weapons, but by massive claws. The metal walls were shredded like paper and green acid had eaten through support beams. What could do this much damage? Commander Zethnal asked while examining the destruction. Taemin knelt down and studied the claw marks in the twisted metal. His fingers traced the deep gouges that were easily twice as long as normal Vex claws. "Queens," he said quietly. Veltar felt his blood turn cold. Vex queens were the stuff of nightmares. These creatures were 5 times larger than normal Vex, with armor so thick that energy weapons barely scratched it. They could spawn dozens of smaller Vex from their own bodies during combat. Most coalition forces avoided queens whenever possible. "Intelligence reports said nothing about queens being here," Rixta protested. "Intelligence was wrong," Yujin said. She was examining acid burn patterns on the walls. Multiple queens. At least 3 based on the damage patterns. Minseo pointed to dark stains on the floor that led deeper into the facility. They dragged something heavy this way. Probably the mining facility supervisor and his staff. Commander Zethnal activated his long-range scanner, but the readings were confused by all the metal and machinery. "I cannot get clear contacts below the 3rd level. Too much interference." The only way down was through a maintenance ladder that descended along the outer wall of the destroyed elevator shaft. It was a narrow metal framework that would force them to climb down one at a time, perfect for an ambush. "This is a trap," Kethmore stated. "The Queens destroyed the elevator to funnel us into a kill zone." "Probably," Taman agreed. "But we still have to go down." Veltar stared at the human. "You want to walk into an obvious trap set by multiple Vex Queens. Sometimes the only way through a trap is to spring it on your own terms," Taman replied. The team spent several minutes discussing alternatives, but there were none. The maintenance ladder was the only route to the lower levels. If they wanted to complete the mission, they had to use it. Taman volunteered to go first again. He slung his projectile weapon and checked that his knives were secure. Then he swung onto the maintenance ladder and began climbing down into the darkness. Veltar followed close behind. The ladder was old and some of the rungs were corroded from acid damage. Each step had to be tested carefully to make sure it would hold their weight. As they descended, Veltar could hear new sounds echoing from below. Deep rumbling noises that vibrated through the metal framework. The sound of something very large moving around in the confined spaces of the mining facility. "Queens are definitely active down there," Taman whispered. "How many do you think?" Veltar asked. "Hard to say, but more than 3 based on the sound patterns." They reached the 3rd level after a 20-meter climb. The ladder continued down to deeper levels, but Taman signaled for them to exit here. The 3rd level had been the main processing center for the mining operation. Huge machines filled enormous chambers with conveyor systems connecting everything together. Most of the machinery had been destroyed. Giant claw marks covered every surface. Acid burns ate through metal supports, causing several machines to collapse completely. But what caught Veltar's attention were the web-like structures hanging from the ceiling. "What are those?" he asked. Taman examined the strange formations with a grim expression. "Vex nurseries. The Queens are breeding here." The web structures contained hundreds of egg sacs, each one the size of a human head. Some were already hatching with small Vex larvae crawling out and dropping to the floor below. "This is not just a raid," Eugen observed as she joined them. "This is a colonization attempt." The full team gathered at the entrance to the main processing chamber. Through the broken machinery, they could see movement in the shadows. Large shapes that could only be Queens moving between the breeding webs. Commander Zethnal studied the tactical situation with obvious concern. Multiple Queens in a confined space with active breeding operations. "This is beyond our mission parameters. We should call for reinforcements," Kethmore suggested. "A full battalion with heavy weapons." But Taman was shaking his head. "By the time reinforcements arrive, this place will be overrun with newly hatched Vex. The infestation will spread to other systems." "What do you suggest?" the commander asked. "We go in now. Hit them before they can coordinate their defenses." Veltar stared at the human in disbelief. "You want to attack multiple Vex Queens in their own breeding ground with 8 soldiers. 6 soldiers, Dongwu corrected. "The 4 of us will handle the Queens. You provide support and watch our backs." The casual way he said it made Veltar's head spin. 4 humans were volunteering to take on multiple Vex Queens while the rest of the team provided support. It was the most insane tactical plan he had ever heard. "This is suicide," Rixta protested. "Queens have armor that deflects energy weapons. They can spawn dozens of warriors during combat. They coordinate their attacks perfectly." "All true," Mincio agreed. "But they also have weaknesses." "Such as?" Commander Zethnal demanded. "They are protective of their breeding webs," Taman explained. "Attack the nurseries and they will focus on defending them instead of coordinating attacks against us." "They are also territorial," Eugen added. "Multiple Queens in one space creates conflict between them. We can use that." Veltar listened to this analysis with growing amazement. These humans were discussing Vex Queen behavior like they had studied it for years. They knew tactics and weaknesses that most Coalition scientists had never even theorized about. "How do you know all this?" he asked. The 4 humans exchanged glances before Taman answered. "We have fought Queens before." "When?" Commander Zethnal demanded. "Human forces have never engaged Vex Queens according to Coalition records." "Not as part of Coalition forces," Dongwu said carefully. The implication hit Veltar like a physical blow. These humans had been fighting the Vex independently before joining the Coalition. They had their own military history that no one knew about. "Your species has been at war," Veltar said. It was not a question. "Our species is always at war," Mincio replied. "Sometimes with others, sometimes with ourselves. War is what we do." The simple honesty of that statement was more terrifying than any threat. Beltar was beginning to understand what the coalition had really gained when humans joined their forces. Not primitive allies learning warfare, but experienced killers who had been fighting before anyone else even knew they existed. As they prepared to assault the Queen breeding chamber, Beltar realized he was about to witness something that would change his understanding of combat forever. He was about to watch 4 humans attack multiple Vex Queens in their own territory, and based on everything he had seen so far, they might actually win. The assault on the Queen breeding chamber began with coordinated explosions that breached 3 walls simultaneously. Yujin had placed her charges with surgical precision to create maximum confusion, while avoiding damage to the structural supports that kept the ceiling from collapsing. Smoke and debris filled the air as the team moved through the breached walls. Beltar followed Taemin through the left breach, expecting to find chaos and confusion. Instead, he found something that made his courage nearly fail. 5 Vex Queens occupied the chamber. Each one was a monster beyond imagination. They stood nearly 6 meters tall with armor plating that looked thick enough to stop tank rounds. Their claws were longer than Veltar's entire arm, and acid dripped constantly from their mandibles, leaving smoking holes in the metal floor. But what terrified him most was how they reacted to the attack. Instead of panicking or rushing forward in typical Vex fashion, the Queens immediately took defensive positions around their breeding webs. They coordinated their movements like experienced military commanders protecting strategic objectives. The first Queen reared up on her hind legs and released a piercing shriek that echoed through the chamber. Immediately, dozens of newly hatched Vex began dropping from the ceiling webs. Within seconds, the floor was covered with small but deadly creatures swarming toward the breach points. Taemin stepped forward into this nightmare and opened fire with his projectile weapon. But he was not aiming at the Queens or even the swarm of hatchlings. His shots targeted the support cables holding up the breeding webs. The first web came crashing down in a tangle of organic material and broken eggs. The Queen protecting it released a roar of rage and charged directly at Taemin. 5 meters of armored death moving faster than anything that large should be able to move. Beltar raised his energy rifle to provide covering fire, but before he could shoot, something impossible happened. Taemin stood his ground as the Queen charged him. He did not dodge or take cover. He waited until the massive creature was almost on top of him, then stepped aside at the last possible moment. The Queen's momentum carried her past him and into the wall behind. The impact shook the entire chamber and left cracks in the reinforced metal. But Taemin was already moving. He had somehow gotten behind the Queen and was climbing up her armored back. His metal knife appeared in his hand as he reached the base of the creature's neck. The blade found a gap between armor plates that Beltar would have sworn did not exist. Green blood sprayed as Taemin drove the knife deep and twisted. The Queen thrashed and bucked, trying to dislodge him, but he held on with one hand while working the knife with the other. Within seconds, the massive creature collapsed and lay still. Beltar stared in shock. A human had just killed a Vex Queen in single combat using nothing but a metal knife and perfect knowledge of anatomy. Across the chamber, similar scenes were playing out. Yujin had somehow gotten underneath another Queen and was placing explosive charges directly against the creature's softer underbelly. When the charges detonated, the Queen was lifted off the ground and thrown against the ceiling. Dongwu and Minseo were working together against a third Queen using tactics that seemed impossible. One would distract the creature while the other attacked from an unexpected angle. Their movements were so perfectly coordinated that they seemed to anticipate each other's actions before they happened. But the battle was far from over. The remaining 2 Queens had learned from watching their sisters die. They positioned themselves back to back in the center of the chamber, where they could protect each other. The swarm of hatchlings formed a protective barrier around them. "Standard Queen formation," Yujin called out as she reloaded her weapon. "Back-to-back defense with hatchling screen." "Confirmed," Taemin replied. "Switch to suppression pattern Delta." Beltar had no idea what suppression pattern Delta meant, but the humans clearly did. They immediately changed their tactics and began moving in a complex pattern around the remaining Queens. Their projectile weapons barked in rhythm as they fired at precise intervals. They were not trying to kill the Queens directly. Instead, they were systematically eliminating the hatchling swarm while staying mobile to avoid the Queen's acid attacks. Each shot dropped a hatchling, and every movement kept them out of the acid spray. Ranged Commander Zethnal and the other coalition soldiers tried to provide support, but found themselves struggling to keep up with the human tactics. The energy weapons were less effective against the swarm of small, fast targets. Within minutes, the hatchling barrier was gone. The two remaining queens stood alone in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the bodies of their offspring. Their protective formation was broken, and they were exposed to attack from all sides. What happened next showed Veltar why humans were the most dangerous species he had ever encountered. There were 4 humans attacked simultaneously from 4 different directions. Not random attacks, but a coordinated assault that had clearly been planned and practiced many times before. Each human knew exactly where the others would be and what they would do. Taemin went high climbing on machinery to get above the queens. Yujin went low sliding under their attacks to reach vulnerable spots. Dongwu attacked from the left while Minseo flanked right. The queens tried to coordinate their defense but found themselves overwhelmed by the perfectly synchronized assault. The battle lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, 5 Vex queens lay dead and the breeding chamber was secure. The humans regrouped at the center of the room and began checking their equipment for damage, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Veltar looked around at the carnage in disbelief. The most dangerous creatures in known space had been eliminated by 4 humans using primitive weapons and flawless teamwork. It should have been impossible. How? He asked Taemin. How what? The human replied while reloading his weapon. How did you coordinate those attacks? How did you know exactly where the weak points were? How did you kill 5 queens with 4 soldiers? Taemin looked at him with those dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets. This is what we do. This is what we have always done. But you are supposed to be new to galactic warfare. We are new to your warfare, Minseo corrected. We have been fighting our own wars for a very long time. Commander Zethnal approached with his scanner showing clear readings for the first time since entering the facility. All major Vex contacts eliminated. Facility is secure. But Veltar knew the real discovery was not the cleared facility. The real discovery was what humans actually were beneath their peaceful appearance. They were not newcomers learning warfare from coalition species. They were experienced killers who had been perfecting the art of combat long before anyone else knew they existed. As they prepared to move to the lower levels to complete their mission, Veltar realized he was no longer fighting alongside allies. He was fighting alongside apex predators who had been hiding among the stars. And that thought terrified him more than any Vex Queen ever could. The team descended to the 4th level, through another damaged stairwell. The Vex had been busy here too, but the destruction was different. Instead of random damage, there were deliberate modifications to the facility structure. Walls had been torn down to create larger spaces. New passages had been carved through solid rock. Acid had been used to etch complex patterns into the metal surfaces. They are building something, Commander Zethanel observed while scanning the modified corridors. Taemin examined the acid etchings more closely. His expression grew grim as he studied the patterns. Not building, communicating. What do you mean? Veltar asked. These are not random marks. They are symbols, a written language. The implications hit everyone at the same time. If the Vex had developed written communication, it meant they were far more intelligent than anyone had realized. The Coalition had been treating them as savage insects when they were actually an organized civilization. Yujin pointed to newer etchings that overlaid the older ones. Multiple authors. Different styles. They are sharing information between groups. Information about what? Rixta demanded. Minseo was studying symbols near what had been the facility's main computer terminal. Coordinates. Star charts. They are mapping Coalition space. The team moved deeper into the 4th level following the symbol trails. The Vex had been systematically accessing every computer system in the facility. Mining records, shipping schedules, supply routes, defensive positions, everything the Coalition used to coordinate their operations in this sector. But what they found in the central data storage chamber made everyone stop and stare in horror. The room was filled with human technology, not primitive chemical weapons or metal knives. Advanced military equipment that was clearly human in design, but unlike anything the Coalition had ever seen. Energy weapons that were decades ahead of current technology, armor systems with capabilities that should have been impossible, communication devices that could probably coordinate operations across multiple star systems. Where did this come from? Commander Zethanol demanded. The four humans exchanged glances before Taemin answered. Supply cache. Left here during earlier operations? What earlier operations? Veltar asked. Humans have only been in this sector for 6 months. Human coalition forces have only been in this sector for 6 months, Dongwu corrected. The distinction was subtle but terrifying. Veltar was beginning to understand that everything the coalition thought they knew about humans was wrong. They were not a newly contacted species learning about galactic politics. They had been operating in coalition space for years or maybe decades before making official contact. How long have your people been here? He asked. Long enough, Yujin replied while examining the advanced equipment. She picked up what looked like a communication device and activated it with practiced familiarity. Immediately, the device began displaying tactical information about Vex positions throughout the facility. Real-time data about enemy movements, defensive positions, and command structures. How is this possible? Rixta demanded. Our best scanners cannot penetrate this deep into the facility. Different technology, Minseo explained, based on different principles. Commander Zethnal was studying an energy weapon that was clearly human, but far beyond anything the Coalition possessed. These weapons are military grade. Advanced military grade. Where did humans acquire this technology? We made it, Taemin said simply. The casual way he said it made Veltar's blood run cold. If humans could create technology this advanced, why were they using primitive projectile weapons and metal knives? Why were they pretending to be less capable than they actually were? The answer came to him with horrifying clarity. They were gathering intelligence, learning about coalition capabilities and weaknesses while hiding their own technological superiority. You have been spying on us, he said. We have been evaluating potential allies, Yujin corrected. There is a difference. What kind of evaluation? Whether you can be trusted, whether you are competent, whether you are worth saving. The words hung in the air like a physical threat. Veltar realized he was not just discovering human capabilities. He was being tested. They all were. The humans had been watching and judging the Coalition's military performance. Saving from what? Commander Zethnal asked. Taemin gestured at the Vex symbols covering the walls. From them. The Vex are not raiders. They are scouts. The real invasion force is still coming. The communication device in Yujin's hands began displaying new information. Star charts showing Vex fleet movements in systems far beyond Coalition space. Hundreds of ships. Thousands of ships. An armada large enough to overwhelm every Coalition defense. How long until they arrive? The commander asked. 6 months. Maybe less. The timeline explained everything. Why humans had suddenly made contact with the Coalition. Why they were sharing their technology and combat expertise. They needed allies for the coming war. But Veltar realized there was something else. Something the humans were not saying. If they had this level of intelligence about Vex operations, it meant they had been fighting this war long before the Coalition even knew it existed. How long have you been at war with the Vex? He asked. The 4 humans looked at each other before Taemin answered. 50 years. The number hit like a physical blow. While the Coalition had been dealing with occasional Vex raids, humans had been fighting a full-scale war against an entire civilization for 50 years. How many of you are there? Veltar asked. Enough, Minseo replied. That is not an answer. It is the only answer you need right now. Veltar understood. The humans were revealing their existence gradually, testing the Coalition's ability to handle the truth. If they failed this test, they might never learn the full scope of what they were dealing with. As they prepared to descend to the final levels of the facility, Veltar realized the mission had changed completely. They were not just clearing out Vex raiders anymore. They were participating in a war that had been going on for decades. A war between humans and an alien civilization that wanted to destroy everything the Coalition had built, and the humans were the only thing standing between the Coalition and total annihilation. The question was whether the Coalition deserved to be saved. The final descent into the 7th level revealed the true horror of what the Vex had been doing at the mining facility. This was not just a raid or even a colonization attempt. It was something far worse. The entire bottom level had been converted into a massive communication array. Organic technology grown from Vex biology was integrated with stolen Coalition equipment to create a transmission system that could reach across the galaxy. But what it was transmitting made Veltar's blood freeze. Complete intelligence reports about every coalition military installation, fleet position, and defensive capability. Detailed maps of populated systems. Population counts for every member species. Everything an invasion force would need to plan a campaign of total extermination. They have been gathering this data for months, Commander Zethnal said while studying the displays. Every system we protect, every world we defend, they know it all. But the humans did not seem surprised by this discovery. They moved through the communication center with familiar efficiency, as if they had seen similar installations before. How many of these arrays have you found? Veltar asked Timon. This is the 14th. The casual way he said it was devastating. While the Coalition had been treating Vex encounters as isolated incidents, the humans had been tracking a coordinated, intelligence-gathering operation across multiple systems. Yu-Jin was working at one of the control stations downloading data from the Vex systems. Her fingers moved across alien interfaces with practiced skill that spoke of extensive experience with this technology. What are you doing? Rixta asked. Learning what they learned, Yu-Jin replied. Understanding how much they know about Coalition defenses. The data download revealed the scope of Vex intelligence gathering. They had detailed information about Coalition fleet strength, response times, command structures, and strategic weaknesses. They knew exactly how to defeat every major defensive position. This is disaster, Commander Zethnal said. With this information, they can destroy the entire Coalition. Only if they get the chance to use it, Mincio replied. She was placing explosive charges throughout the communication array with methodical precision. What do you mean? Veltar asked. The invasion fleet is still 6 months away, Tamian explained. If we destroy their intelligence network now, they will have to attack blind. Dongwu was working at another control station tracking the communication links between this array and others throughout Coalition space. 17 more installations detected, all connected to this central hub. Can we destroy them all? Commander Zethnal asked. Not in time, Yu-Jin said. But we can do something better. She activated a program that began uploading false information into the Vex network. Fake fleet positions, misleading defensive capabilities, entirely fictional military installations. Within minutes, the Vex intelligence database was flooded with lies designed to confuse and misdirect their invasion planning. How did you know how to do that? Veltar demanded. We have been fighting this war for 50 years, Taman reminded him. We learned how their systems work. As the data corruption program spread through the Vex network, Veltar realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. The humans had not just been fighting the Vex, they had been winning. This level of technical skill and strategic thinking came from decades of successful military operations. How many Vex have you killed? He asked. The 4 humans looked at each other before Mincio answered. Enough to matter. That is not an answer. The real answer would frighten you. Veltar thought about everything he had seen over the past few hours. The casual efficiency with which humans killed, their perfect knowledge of Vex anatomy and tactics, their advanced technology hidden behind primitive appearances, their decades of secret warfare. I am already frightened, he admitted. Taman nodded slowly. Good. Fear keeps you alive in this war. The explosive charges were set and the team prepared to evacuate the facility. But as they moved toward the exit, Veltar had to ask the question that had been building in his mind since the first engagement. What happens now? After we destroy this place, after we disrupt their intelligence network. What comes next? We fight, Yu-Jin said simply. All of us, together. If the Coalition proves worthy of survival, Dongwu added. The qualification was spoken quietly, but it carried the weight of final judgment. Veltar understood that this entire mission had been a test. The humans had been evaluating Coalition military capabilities and decision-making under pressure. What determines if we are worthy, he asked. Whether you can learn, whether you can adapt, whether you can do what is necessary to survive. The facility exploded behind them as they reached the surface. The communication array was destroyed along with months of Vex intelligence gathering. But Veltar knew this was just the beginning. The real war was still coming. An invasion force that had been planning to destroy the Coalition with perfect intelligence would now have to attack with corrupted data and false information. It would be confused and misdirected, but it would still be massive and deadly. The Coalition would need every advantage to survive. They would need human technology, and human tactics and human willingness to do whatever was necessary for victory. As they boarded the transport for the return journey, Veltar looked at Taemin with new understanding. This quiet soldier with his primitive weapons and metal knives was part of a military force that had been fighting the war for galactic survival while the Coalition lived in peaceful ignorance. "Will you teach us?" Veltar asked. "Will you show us how to fight like you do?" Taemin considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Fighting like us means becoming like us." "Are you prepared for that change?" Veltar thought about what he had witnessed: the cold efficiency, the absolute ruthlessness, the willingness to do anything necessary for victory. It would mean abandoning everything the Coalition thought they knew about civilized warfare. "If it means survival, then yes. Then we will teach you. But understand this. Once you learn to fight like humans, there is no going back. You cannot unlearn what war really means." As the transport lifted off from the mining facility, Veltar realized his entire understanding of the galaxy had changed forever. The Coalition was not alone. They had allies who had been protecting them without their knowledge. Allies who had been fighting humanity's wars and alien wars and every kind of war imaginable. But they were also facing an enemy that wanted to destroy everything they had built. An enemy that showed no mercy and accepted no surrender. The coming months would determine whether the Coalition could learn to fight like humans, whether they could become the kind of killers that survival demanded, whether they were worthy of the protection they had been receiving all along. Veltar looked out at the stars and knew that everything was about to change. The age of peaceful exploration was ending. The age of total war was about to begin, and humanity was ready for it. The question was whether anyone else would be ready in time.